Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Friday, January 17th, 2025 at 10:33 in the morning. So we're back from the floor. We're now here to have some more introductions. We have Ceiling with us. Gus, thank you for joining us. We certainly appreciate your time. And
I think we're muting at the same time.
And thank you for joining us this morning. I think before we get started before you introduce yourselves, I'll have the committee introduce themselves to you. We have many new members this year. We may not. John?
My name is Jonathan Cooper. I live in Pownell. The district includes Searsburg, Leedsboro, Stanford, and Woodford.
I'm Emily Karras Duncan, Wilmington, Whitingham, and Halifax, but I'm also on the Land Access Opportunity Board.
Herb Olson, representing the towns in that is Northeast Addison County, Lincoln, Moncton, Starkville. Let's see.
Hi, I'm Abby Duke from Burlington, the part of Burlington with the largest residential development in the state.
Edie Granning, representing Jericho and Underhill, and the vice chair of the committee. Welcome.
Mike Marcotte from Coventry, representing Coventry, Hartford, Newport Town. Troy J. Westfield, Chair.
Kirk White, I represent Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock, and I'm the ranking member of the committee.
Tony Priestley, Redford, Fairleigh, Westwood.
Berry City.
Tony Miklas from Milton, representing most of Milton, a little bit of Georgia, and I'm also a realtor.
And Dave Bosch, representing Wallingford, Clarendon, West Rutland, and the bulk of Rutland Town.
Well, for the record, I'm Gus Seelig. I'm the director of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which will introduce you to our work today. And with me is Polly Major. Polly, you want to say a few words?
Hi, for the record, I'm Polly Major. I'm the director of policy and special projects for VHCB. I've been with VHCB for about 2 years, and I live in Berlin, but I'm originally from Westminster, so I have a soft spot in my heart for Southern Vermont.
And also with us today is the director of our Farm and Forest Viability Program, Liz Gleason. And if we get toward the end of the presentation, she'll say a few words. So let me start by saying a few things. First, thank you for your service. I've been around the legislature. I began this job in 1987, so I have a pretty good view of how hard legislators work and how little you're compensated, and that you do it on behalf of your constituents. And I think Vermont needs to be grateful we have the kind of legislature we do, where you're so accessible. I want to thank you for the enormous support you've given to the board over many years, and especially over these years where we had a pandemic and now a recovery and now a housing crisis that was there before but is much more intense today. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the partnership that you asked us to develop with Career Tech Ed Centers. We'll only spend one slide on that today, but we'd be happy to come back and talk in more depth on that. And all the kind work when we broke ground for the first project in Newport with the Career Tech Ed Center up there. Our goal is to give you an overview of VHCB. When we were originally invited, I think we were invited with the finance agency and they couldn't come today. So do we have?
Actually, Maura will be in later.
So how long do we have? Because
Maura is going to be available by 11, but you have 11:15.
Okay, we will try to speed up because we thought she wasn't coming and we had the rest of the morning. Our work, I think, is very consistent with many of the goals the governor's announced in terms of making Vermont more affordable, protecting vulnerable citizens, growing the economy. We act kind of as a public foundation, which is to say with our dual mission of housing and conservation, distribute resources across the state. As I looked at the makeup of this committee, I think it's really exciting that this committee, more than I think I've ever seen in past years, represents so many small communities where we need the economy to thrive as well. And we'll try to talk about that. Obviously, the need for housing is driving the whole economy, but we'll also talk about other ways that we serve the rural economy, and particularly with our Farm and Forest Viability Program. In opening this presentation, this is downtown St. Johnsbury, and very briefly, for those of you who don't know St. J, the community went through a really difficult time about a dozen years ago. The whole select board became so difficult that the town voted them all out in one election. That led to a visit from a group that some of you know of, the Vermont Council on Rural Development, a community visit. And out of that process, the community said, our number one priority, if we're going to reclaim our town, is to turn the building you're looking at around. We work with Senator Kitchell to get a special appropriation, but the story here is owned by a guy from Massachusetts who just bled the building dry. There's about 10,000 square feet of commercial space. This is the key corner in St. J, and for most of the 30 years he owned it, that space was left vacant. The apartments were overcrowded. There was many years of a bed bug infestation. Just really difficult. And we turned it around with a partnership between a group called Rural Edge and Evernorth. And they did a condominium. And so the local Economic Development Association bought all the commercial space, and it is all now filled. This is what's called a tax credit partnership. Maura can talk more about how those things work financially if you want to get into the details of it. One of the issues on everybody's mind is cost. When we did this, it cost a little over $300,000 per apartment. That sounds like a lot of money. It was the most expensive project we'd ever done. Today, at today's pricing, that looks like a great bargain, and I'm glad we did it. And everything I know about real estate, when we did the most expensive project we ever did down the street in St. Johnsbury after a fire 20 years earlier, it was 150,000 a unit. And we said, how can we go that high? The nature of construction and real estate, the problem of affordable housing, that's an oxymoron. Housing costs too much compared to what Vermonters earn. And that's not just a problem in Vermont or in Northern New England or California. It's true across the country. There was a headline in the Wall Street Journal saying a week or so ago saying it's now an international problem, not just a national one. So we can talk more about that, but here's our statutory purposes, and you will see in the purposes, it's not just to conserve land or build or preserve housing. It is also about economic vitality and quality of life. So all three of these projects that you see here, 2 stores, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know which way you come south, but you probably can pass both of these stores. We're part of a group of people in a community saying we need a store here again. I know the one in East Calais because that's where I live, and talked with Representative Mahaly because he chaired the local committee that brought it back. They both got support through something called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, which is a grant writing program you'll hear about more when Liz gets to speak with you. The bridge you see is one that was built at the Bluffside Farm, connecting it to Prouty Beach in Newport. And the Bluffside Farm was bought by the Vermont Land Trust. They thought they would just flip it to a young farmer, but the community got very interested. And I speak to you about this as an economic development project because the other side of the Bluffside Farm connects to the BB Rail Trail, which goes to the Canadian border and miles of trails beyond. So I think we viewed it, and I think Newport, when they said, please help us with this, viewed this as an economic development initiative that would ultimately support a community that has really been hurting. Before the EB5 scandal, it was hurting, and it's hurting more since then. This is a bit about our dual goals in Rutland. So we have a building under construction in West Rutland. If you've never been to the West Rutland Marsh, it is a national, maybe international site for birders and brings people there that we helped conserve some years ago. Our conservation mission includes historic preservation. So in the same vein that we give historic preservation grants to things like old buildings that have stores, the Paramount Theater got a grant from us when they were in the midst of getting reopened and revitalized. And that's clearly an economic driver. So as representative of your community, part of my message today is if there's something that you see of any of the types that we'll describe today, please tell your constituents to make our phone ring. We want to be helpful. More about dual goals. Putnam Block, the upper floors, this is at the intersection of 7 and 9 in Bennington, were vacant since the 1970s. It's now been restored through a partnership that included Bennington College and the hospital. Prospect Mountain was operated by some entrepreneurs for 30 years. They ran out of energy. It is at the highest point of any cross-country ski center in the state, so it has snow when others don't. A nonprofit formed, and we helped them with the acquisition through a conservation easement on the forest land. And the Morgan Street wetlands, I'm told, is very close to downtown in Bennington. And interesting, it was not pitched to us by a group like the Nature Conservancy. It was actually pitched to us to conserve by the local economic development officials because they thought it was a big enhancement to the town of Bennington in terms of why people would live there and recreate there. And just one more, here's work in Bradford. And over many years, there's been a very active person in Bradford who's headed up the conservation of Wrights Mountain. Later on, I'll show you a picture of what you see when you get to the peak. And I think any of us can make the hike there. It's a very easy walk. But we've invested in the village as well. To get to big numbers and to get to what we've done with you over the last number of years, you've provided unusual amounts of funding, both the state investment, VHCB investment in both ARPA dollars and general fund one-time dollars, and that's leveraged almost $700 million. And so there's been about $1 billion investment in real estate. What you see below speaks to the kind of housing we've built, and we cover the gamut from home ownership to rental. Those are the two biggest things we do. But obviously, the Agency of Human Services, your Human Services community has asked us to expand shelter capacity. We've about helped double it, just about that. We've worked on mobile home communities, usually with either acquisition by residents or with infill in lots or infrastructure assistance that's needed to bring facilities up. With the one-time money, we began a program to help farmers with providing better housing for their employees. And the last thing that Jolinda LeClaire said to me before she left state government for Governor Scott, where she was the chief recovery officer, was please help establish recovery residences for people struggling with addiction. So that's a broad range of what we do. In terms of the people that are employed that are in most of our housing, rental and home ownership, we do house elderly and disabled people, but we're housing tons and tons of working people. And we didn't bring a slide today on this, but if you're an elementary school teacher who's making $60,000 a year, you can qualify for much of the rental housing. We'll describe our home ownership program in a little bit. These are the big numbers, all-time investments. We'll spend just a little bit of time on our conservation work today, not a lot. And the working lands businesses is what Liz will focus on. When I got going in this work many years ago, I was told there were 3 things to remember about affordable housing. Preserve what you have, because if you lose it, you're just digging the hole deeper. Protect vulnerable populations and produce more. And Copley Terrace is a great example of preservation. And we just got a real estate notice a few days ago about more than 100 Section 8 apartments being put on the market in 3 or 4 communities all over the state. Copley was built by the hospital. It's been affordable homes with deep subsidies for close to 40 years. They thought, gee, we have an employment crisis for our employees. Maybe we should convert it to housing for nurses. And then they had to think about what that would mean for the residents who'd been there for many years and where they would go. And ultimately they, and a group called Evernorth, came to us to preserve it as affordable housing. And we're going to close on this deal in a few weeks. Had we not, 40 elderly, low-income seniors would have had a really hard time located in their community and perhaps found no place to go.
Gus, can I interrupt you here as we move through this slide to talk about protecting vulnerable populations? I want to talk a little bit about this gentleman here in the middle, Steve. Steve was homeless and experienced homelessness and found shelter in the state's hotel program. but a partner developer of ours, Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust with VHCB support, developed a new building in downtown Bellows Falls, and Steve was able to get permanent housing there. And he talked a little bit to the developer about what that housing meant for him. And I just want to share a quote because I think it illustrates how life-changing housing can be. He said, "I've come a long way, believe me. Everything is good as long as I maintain my health. That's pretty incredible, given that 6 years ago, they gave me only a 25% chance. That's what housing can do. If I wasn't where I am right now, I know my health would just go downhill." So this is saving healthcare costs. It's also saving lives.
The picture on the right, thank you, Polly, for the interruption. That was great. The picture on the right is the beginning of the revitalization of the Sacred Heart Complex, school complex in Newport that again has been vacant for 30 years. Senator Engels said to me, "Okay, I finally understand. You make stuff work when the market can't." Because he said, "I've shown this property to dozens of people over the years. Nobody would buy it." Single family home ownership. We've invested in about 1,400 homes. There's another 100 that will come online over the next 12 to 18 months that are in development now. We use something called a shared appreciation approach, which is to say people get in at a discounted price because we help subsidize it. And they agree to walk away with a quarter of the increase in the value of the homes. And that's meant that 680 of those homes upon resale has gone again as an affordable home to somebody who otherwise would have needed a subsidy or would not have gotten into the home ownership market. So we think of it as a fiscally conservative approach to using the public dollar to recycle it from one generation to the next, and permanent affordability is written into our statute. The home here, just by the way, was built by Bennington Habitat for Humanity and the Nature Conservancy, because we have this dual mission. Actually, we were doing a conservation deal and they said, "We don't need this acre here. It's right on the road. Let's do something for housing here." And we've done that 3 or 4 times across the state with a conservancy. I'm not going to dwell on this slide in the interest of time, but this is 42 apartments in Hartford. Hartford got 100 new apartments this year. But briefly, and we're happy to come back, our investment of $6 million unlocked $8.5 million in private equity through the tax credits and federal investment. The rents will be $1,100 to $1,300 a month. The market rate in the Upper Valley would have made these $2,400 a month, but I'm not sure a private developer, and this was built by DEW Construction in what we call a turnkey deal. So upon completing construction, they turned it over to the nonprofit partner. You would have needed to make at least $82,000 a year. We will have people here that will be well below that. 66 is the top level to which it's affordable.
So I want to talk a little bit about the housing programs that we administer. You heard Gus talk about earlier the impacts that we've had in our housing mission since 2020 with the support from the legislature, and how those impacts run the housing spectrum from home ownership through multifamily development, through shelter. And that's because what VHCB does is we receive state appropriated funds, which we then braid with federal funds and administer a whole suite of targeted housing programs. And that's because we know that Vermont's communities are really diverse populations, have different needs. And so there's no one size fits all for an approach to increasing housing in a community. And that's why you see this really broad range of programs. And I'm going to talk through a few of them. What's a commonality between these is that our statute asks us to focus on households that are below 100% AMI for rental housing, and we can go up to 120% AMI, average median income, for home ownership. And one of the reasons that is why we're focused on this end of the income spectrum is that's really where the need is highest, where people are facing the hardest choices between their housing costs and covering their housing costs, covering other essential costs like healthcare, like food, like transportation. And we see that when people are not able to cover those other costs because they're spending so much on housing, that's when we see them slipping through the cracks, either losing their housing, ending up in the GA program, or losing their good health, ending up in our emergency room. So I'm just going to pass around a chart that shows how rent burden is really highest on the lowest for income brackets. And that's just a reference to leave review there. And like Gus mentioned earlier, when we think about who is housed in all these different types of housing for that VHCB supports, it's our childcare workers, our teachers, our nursing assistants, our automotive mechanics, these professions that keep our communities going, but that maybe don't pay enough to afford what is now the median price for a new single family home, which is $615,000. That's just, there's a market gap that makes it unaffordable for too many Vermonters. Another point I want to make is that VHCB, we're not developers. We work with a statewide network of primarily nonprofit, but also for-profit developers who are really committed to stewarding these homes in perpetuity. That means keeping them affordable forever to protect that public asset. Gus talked about homeownership. An important source of especially rural homeownership is manufactured home communities. And so we have a targeted program to support those communities that helps primarily nonprofit and cooperative parks purchase the park, invest in infrastructure, and something we've been excited about recently is place new high energy efficiency homes in those parks. Gus touched on this, but this committee and the chair was very instrumental in creating the Career Technical Education Revolving Loan Program. And this really gets to one of the cost drivers in housing, which is workforce. And so this is a revolving loan program that we've partnered with the Vermont Community Loan Fund to administer that gets funding to career technical education centers to get students out on actual home job sites, get students building housing. And it's impacted 6 communities around the state, and there's more that are excited to access these funds. Rental development is a huge part of the state's strategy for meeting our housing needs. If we need 25,000 to 36,000 homes in the decade, as you'll hear from Maura when she talks about the housing need assessment, we need to build at scale, and at scale can be in a number of different communities. This is a project in West Burke, a very rural setting that we were able to preserve affordable housing and add additional units. And it can also be in downtown settings across the state. So here we see the Bellows Falls Garage, where gentleman Steve now lives. We see a really village scale development being done in Bradford as well. And because of that investment that the state has made, we're in the middle of a really exciting build out of affordable housing in the state, and it's momentum that we'd like to continue. So during this summer, we had a several week span where about 8 projects either broke ground or were completed all across the state. And these were from recovery residences, shelters, senior housing you're seeing in Reed Commons up there, a new neighborhood in Shelburne, which is going to be rental and homeownership on Bay Ridge, and service-supported housing for Vermonters exiting homelessness in Burlington with Cox Main Street. So a lot is underway, and our partners are eager to do more. And we see the addition of housing really building community resilience and working together with our conservation programs to do this. So I'm seeing the time. I want to make sure we get to Liz. Happy to talk more about how our work intersects with resilience. This is a building in Barre that we've helped fund, and we're hoping to see go up over the next several years to replace some housing lost there in the past few years flooding. And we also work to house, as Gus talked about, Vermonters who have special needs to stay in housing. So this is everything from recovery housing to shelters. Most of the Vermonters experiencing homelessness are housed within our existing housing stock, not in shelters. And this slide is showing you that there's about 1,400 homes that were created to be perpetually affordable that are now housing Vermonters who are exiting homelessness. And to end on a cheery note of our housing programs, we have an innovation fund to meet emerging needs. So we worked with a group in central Vermont who needed to find a home for a family of 9 who had been evacuated from Afghanistan. they were able, with our support, to purchase a home for that family who's now living in Montpelier.
Okay, so this is a slide you saw at the, for those of you who were at the presentation, Maura and I did at the orientation. This is the densest and most mixed income neighborhood in the city of Burlington. And a piece of the story here is, and perhaps the rep from Burlington would disagree with me, but there was a big fight in Burlington about should there be any development on this lot.
Oh, yeah, there was a fight.
And what I'd say to you is the developer could have made just as much money as he's gonna make if he built 25 starter castles here. And what happened was the Vermont Land Trust actually got involved, raised some money, got a grant from us, and there's 12 acres you can't see in this photo down below along the lake that's been turned into a public park. And I think that really changed the nature of the debate. And the city decided, we are the city of Burlington, we do want density. And then that allowed Mr. Farrell to move forward with a very intense development. We funded the first 2 buildings that were built here. But the big luxury condominiums that are going up now are gonna, as affordable, our part was affordable housing. The luxury condominiums Ireland is building might cost $3 to $4 million. So it will be the most mixed income neighborhood in the community. We've got another 70 units that are scheduled to start this coming summer, both rental and affordable home ownership. These were our recommendations earlier to you. The one thing I need to say is that affordable housing will not work for those firefighters, cops, teachers, nursing assistants, mechanics, all the people who make our communities go at the market value. And if you eliminate all the permitting costs, you'll reduce the cost about 2%. And I'm not saying permit reform isn't important. What's most important about permit reform is that developers need certainty about when they can build and how they can build, how long it'll take, or they won't take the risk. So fixing the permit process is important from that perspective. But if we change the permit process and get rid of most permits, we're not going to save big money. That will bring the cost down to a place that if you make 60, 70,000, 80,000 a year, even 100, that you're going to be able to buy something new. This is our pipeline for the balance of this year and our available funding. And I mention this in part because we thought in last year's budget, there was a contingent line for the reallocation of ARPA funding. And at that point, $30 million was written in for us. Doug Farnham was optimistic even into early December that the summer he thought we might see all of it. December, he said, well, it won't be less than 10 million. And over the holidays, he said, I'm sorry, but what I've been able to do to protect the state has been to swap it into what was called general fund replacement. And so all the people who had not spent their ARPA dollars no longer had the ARPA time limits, and they said, don't take our money away. So we're short for the balance of this year, and next year's pipeline is even bigger. And what that will mean if we can't find a way to address it, and I understand we're heading into different budget times, is that developers will stop spending money on architects, on engineers, on permitting, on site design, if they don't feel like the projects are going to get funded, whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit. I'm going to spend a minute or two and then give it to Liz on the farm economy. You probably know the Chaput brothers, Mr. Chairman. When I first met Reg Chaput, we both had hair on our heads. And Reg had a dream, which was to buy some land, the Brasser farm, and build up a 900 cow herd. He and his brother were much smaller at that point. We've done 4 or 5 conservation deals with him now. What development rights do when we buy development rights is it reduces the cost of acquisition for a farmer on an average of about 60%. So in an industry where the margins are so tight, it makes a huge difference. He's now up to 3,200 acres. He went from the 900 cow dairy when we helped him. And when we did that, it was in the recession of the mid-90s. And I'm told that the freestall barn he built that year was the largest construction project in Orleans County. So these things have an economic impact. These guys have 28 employees today. They're milking 1,600. They've got another 800 animals beyond that. At the other end of the state, the Course Dairy is an organic dairy down in southern Vermont in Wilmington. And their land base was at risk, 60 cow organic farm, and they leased a lot of land from their neighbors and took good care of it. And the difficulty that they faced was that as that land turned over, especially in the pandemic, they were losing access to land. So we helped them by buying development rights on their home farm many years ago, that more than a decade ago. And the last few years, we've helped them buy more acreage that they can secure so that they can keep operating. They're an organic dairy. So at every range of the farm economy, we are there for folks. The farm upstream is a different example of two different enterprises. They were far flung all over many places, and they've landed on 52 acres in Jericho. This young man bought the farm that Mike and Tom Audette had been farming on, and their family before, their parents before that for many years, and they were generous in a bargain sale. And he's taken over a conventional dairy. So the development rights program makes a big difference in terms of farm affordability. There was a headline in the New York Times a few years ago. This is what you see when you get to the top of that Wrights Mountain. So you look south at Mount Ascutney. After the lodge burned, the community came to us because property values had declined, ski area had closed, and they said, can you help us conserve land? We want to take a page from Kingdom Trails and make us a place that mountain bikers are going to want to come. They've actually now installed a little bit of family skiing, but became a revitalization effort. The Times story said, a town that saved a mountain that saved a town. So this is another example of conservation having an economic impact. And again, all over the state, we've helped establish or fund with our historic preservation dollars, community gathering places in Barry, the old Labor Hall, but also the History Center that opened probably about 15, 20 years ago now. When Stanley Tools left Shaftesbury, they came to us and said, would you help us turn Robert Frost's home, the poet, into a museum? Because we want there to be a reason for people to come to Shaftesbury. So as reps of rural communities, we're happy to be creative in working with your citizens to make a difference. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Liz.
Thanks, guys. Liz Gleason, I'm the program director for our Farm and Forest Variability Program and our Rural Economic Development Initiative, which are two of the HCB's programs that we added on over time. The Farm and Forest Viability Program has been around for about 2 decades, and at that point, we'd been conserving farms for a little over 15 years. That moment of infusion of capital, selling development rights was really helping with affordability and land access. And we were seeing that farmers were still struggling, with really intense market pressures. Margins are slim. So the legislature created a program to help with sort of the business development side to make sure that people could build their management skills, and really be able to operate profitable, successful businesses in our economy. So for the past 21, 22 years, we've been operating this small business development program embedded within the HCB's overall social mission. I'm going to talk for a few more minutes about the work we do with farmers, and then I'm mostly going to focus on our Rural Economic Development Initiative, which was created in this building in 2017 to help small towns get money. Really, we weren't adequately drawing down federal resources to do community-based economic development. So I'll talk about what that program has done in our towns. So Farm and Forest Viability, we're a business planning program. We work with all kinds of farms, all kinds of forest businesses, all scales. We do a lot around access to farmland, getting onto new farms, helping young farmers take over farms that might close if they couldn't find a successor. We do a really sort of holistic approach where it's looking at the whole business from, how is this business going to work for someone's family? How can we make sure you can pay employees? How can we make sure you're profitable? if you want to grow, how do we make sure that happens in a way that works for everyone? And we do focus on some of the traditional, like really financial economic indicators. We see a really strong growth and profitability after our program. We see really strong growth in sales after our program. Not everyone needs to grow, but that is something that people come to us for help with. You can see in these bubbles that we do a lot around access to capital. So through that business planning process, helping to identify what are the sources of financing that can fund this expansion or improvement, what kinds of grants are available for you. And just this past year, we worked with folks to get over $5.5 million in grants and loans for that farm and forest-based economic development work. This is a picture of Full Belly Farm in Moncton. We worked with them, about 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit less. Really cool project. It was a U-pick strawberry operation that had been, highly local, like really beloved in that community, and they were closing. They needed to find someone to take over, so found this young couple. They worked with Vermont Land Trust and VHCB around a conservation easement, and then helped them figure out how to grow and change that business to meet the next set of needs. Did you want to add something else?
No.
Okay. So just quickly on some more of those sort of economic indicators. We looked over the past sort of 3 years of our clients, which is exiting COVID and the aftermath. We worked with, we went from working with about 100 businesses to during COVID, really pivoting to meet a new set of needs. And over a year and a half, worked with over 600 businesses to figure out how to manage that really intense time. And now we're back down to working with 100 to 200, but we see a really strong, about a 25% increase in sales and a 36% increase in profitability. And what that means on these small businesses is what people are able to pay themselves and their employees and reinvest in their businesses. Like farm and forest businesses are not here to, margins are slim. And what it means is that people need to be able to take care of their family and feed their communities and take care of their land. All right, I think I have about 4 more minutes, right? We're going to 11:15. I'm going to switch over to our Rural Economic Development Initiative, a small but mighty program. So there were a couple really important federal sources of funding that a bunch of people flagged, including, now I'm forgetting all the people that were involved, but it was a lot of people who were noticing, a lot in the community development world, small town development world, who were saying like, there's some really important federal sources that we're missing out on, that we're not adequately drawing down. And for years, our program had been helping farms access big federal grants. There's a few key ones that have made a really big difference in like specialty foods and value-added products, cheese, and really helps Vermont be a driver there. So we started a program that basically comes in when a small town doesn't have staff capacity or time or experience, or a small rural business doesn't have the grant writing skills to help them with that moment of access to capital and getting those grants that really spur development. So we've spent about $1 million since 2017 on that program. And those communities so far have accessed almost 23 million in mostly federal grants, but also some state and philanthropic dollars. And we've got, I think right now, another $1 million pending. This is another picture of the Newport Bluffside Bike Path. We've done a bunch of work with Newport over the last several years, from outdoor rec projects, including the bike path and some winter ski trails, to downtown revitalization work. Couple just last projects I want to highlight. Rural Economic Development Initiative, we call it READY. Just like VHCB, we have a very broad set of organizations and businesses that we try to support as really a holistic look at what makes community-based economic development work. What are the projects that communities are coming to us for? I heard y'all talking a little bit about the challenge and constraints around water and wastewater infrastructure, and how that can really limit the ability to for businesses to expand, to build housing in small towns. So this is a fun picture. of a press conference where the Northern Border Regional Commission, which is a federal agency, announced $1 million in funding for water infrastructure in North Hero. So we'll work with really big projects like that. We also work on a lot of outdoor recreation projects. For example, bringing in over 300,000 for trail building in Bethel. We do a lot with rural general stores that really struggle with profitability and turnover of ownership, and try to make those stores like community hubs that have a lot of activity. And on the agricultural side of our Rural Economic Development Initiative, these are just two really great recent projects. The Vermont Livestock Slaughter and Processing is in Ferrisburg. They're one of our biggest meat processing businesses. We have a lot of great meat production in the state, but it's really limited by that processing. They're one of only 74 projects in the country that have gotten this really big, complex federal funding for small meat processing operations. They were able to draw down $1 million, which will triple their production. And then this is Maplebrook Farm in North Bennington. They make all different kinds of cheese. It's really delicious. If you haven't had them yet, helps them get a $500,000 grant to really bump up their mozzarella production. And as someone who has made mozzarella as a job after college, I am very appreciative of all efficiencies to be gained in that work. So that's a really short overview of the Farm and Forest Viability Program and the Rural Economic Development Initiative.
So with that, and knowing that you want to hear from more today, you haven't asked us, I don't think, any questions, but if you have some questions, we're happy to answer them today or to come back. But I think our chief message is there's lots of ways as representatives of small rural communities that we think we can be helpful, whether it's housing or conservation or community development. And we want to be there for your constituents. And please let us know when you hear of or think there's an opportunity.
Thank you, Gus. It's truly amazing the return on investment.
Yeah.
I think if I remember right, the READY program started with discussions with former Senator Starr.
This was his idea along with Ted Brady, I think actually suggested it, and Ellen Chapin was his successor, was at the helm. And Ted knew from his years in rural development, USDA, that we were not being aggressive enough. And now you've built up a program at AOA in the last year, and they are subcontracting some of that with us. So we're trying to stay in our lane of where our expertise is. We don't need to be the service provider for every single possible federal grant, but I think small communities, I know in my town, we've restored 2 buildings that never would have happened without some help.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you very much. We certainly will be back in and have more discussions, and I'm sure there's lots of questions around the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the North Seminary project. Yeah, there's one we're also going to do, hoping to do 4 units over by the public safety building within Phil House. As well. We know that I spent the first 10 years of my career in Barry at Community Action, so I know I can remember when the North End was very different than it is today. So there's lots of work we need to do together.
Also, and the horse farm and their cows graze on my land.
Oh, good to know. By the family.
Best friends.
Look forward to getting to know you. I'm sorry I haven't seen you at a land access. No. Back.
Before you, she's on.
You said morning.
I think
Good morning.
Going right in?
Yeah.
she's actually, they just reference it, but she used to work. She's. What?
Hello.
Morning. Thank you for
Morning.
joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm going to turn the screen and jump right in and introduce myself.
Probably while you're doing that, I can ask the committee to introduce themselves to you. There are a lot of new members here this year.
See that?
Mike Harrison, Wilmington, Worthington, and Halifax.
Herb Olson from representing Bristol, Lincoln, Buckton, and Starksville.
Abby Duke from part of Burlington, the part that includes Cambridge now.
Edie Branning, Jericho, and Underhill, and the vice chair of the committee.
And Mike Markout from Coventry, representing Coventry, Irisburg, Newport Town, Troy, Jay, Westfield, Lowell, and Eden, chair of the committee.
Kirk White, I represent Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock, and I'm the ranking member.
Monique Priestley, Bradford, Fairleigh, Westfield.
Michael Booton, Berry City.
Tony Nicholas from Milton, representing Milton and a little bit of Georgia. I'm also a Realtor.
Dave Bosch from Clarendon, representing Wallingford, Clarendon, West Rutland, and the bulk of Rutland Town.
Now this.
I forget about most important person here.
Ingrid.
Grace.
Nice to meet you. No, the scary part is I have to admit to you that I actually knew who you all were because we stalked you because that's our job. Don't quiz me on all the towns you represent. Yeah. I'm Maura Collins. I am the executive director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. I'll explain in my testimony what VHFA is, but in the meantime, I'll just tell you that I've been in this role. I just finished my 5th year, although I've been at the agency for 22 years. So I started as our research analyst. And so you will find that my testimony is rooted in a lot of boring stats, data, numbers. And I want to talk a little bit about the housing market and then VHFA's role in addressing the housing market. But really what I want to spend most of my time on is honing in on a few programs, several of which were born in this committee. I want to give you updates on them. And you know, it wouldn't be testimony if I didn't have a few asks at the end. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining to you that we have a housing problem in the state because I believe you read the same news that I do and your constituents are talking to you as much as people are calling me up to say your job is to do affordable housing. Why aren't you doing a better job with it? You can see on the left here how many people are not able to afford their homes. How do we know who can't afford their home? Well, it's when someone's paying more than 30% of their income for their housing costs. 30% is not a magic number. Some people should not be paying a full 30%. Some people have high healthcare costs, childcare costs, and the like, but 30% is the number we use academically. So you can see that 31% of Vermonters are in unaffordable housing. They're paying more than they should for their housing. And when you look at renters who predominantly have lower incomes, that cost burden, the people paying too much, is actually far higher, and it's more than half of our renters. Especially, I'm concerned about the 25% of our renters who are paying more than half their income for their rent. They are at very high risk of eviction or displacement should they have a bad muffler or some kind of unexpected expense. But it's not easy to move into homeownership. So if you look at the table on the right, you can see that just a couple of years ago, the median for sale home was about $260,000. And at a 3% interest rate, which was excellent. You only had to pay about $1,700 a month for your mortgage. And so you could get away with earning $68,000 and afford half the homes that we're selling in the state, which is the median. And that meant that 24,500 renters, roughly, could have afforded the median priced home that year. But fast forward just a couple years, the median home price has gone up because of the supply and demand crunch that we have. And so prices are rising. Interest rates have about doubled. And so that same median priced home, not the same home, but it could be if it inflated, would cost $2,700 a month for the mortgage. And so you'd have to earn closer to $110,000 a year. And you can see that the number of renters earning that much has dropped precipitously. So that's where we see that we've gone from almost a third of our renters being able to buy that median priced for sale home to now about 13% of our renters.
Last night on the way home, I was listening to VP and they were talking about, mortgage rates have now gone up to 7.01.
Yes, there's been a lot of debate about why, if we keep lowering the federal funds rate, why aren't mortgage rates moving in tandem? Those of us who work in the industry are aware that it's not a 1-for-1, despite people wanting it to be. And that is some complicated math, but yes, mortgage rates are stubbornly high. Although for those of us who get to say things like we've been doing this for 20+ years, I will say that a 6 to 7% mortgage rate is not what we had in the 80s. You know, it's not the kind of shockingly high rates, but when you have had 2.5 to 3.5% rates for many years, of course, it's that delta and that change. We're feeling the change in velocity right now, like we've hit the brakes while driving on the highway.
Well, and I think it's the cost of building has also gone really high,
Yes.
which makes it even harder. You have to mortgage more money.
Yes.
So,
Housing
You're-
prices, what they
Yeah.
aren't what they were in the 80s
No.
either.
yeah, yeah.
So, and some of this is driven by the lack of supply. You can see here that for the last decade or so that we have been bringing online between 1,200 and 3,000 some odd homes each year. And if we're going to meet the targets that we've set in the housing needs assessment, we're going to have to more than double that. And so it just goes to show that we need to have a boom in construction right now. It needs to start today. They already have to be permitted if they're going to be occupied by the end of 2025. So I can tell you we're already behind the curve because we do not see that many new permits coming. Although credit to the legislature and what you all have been doing the last few years, we are seeing some uptick in building permit data in municipalities, as likely as a result of a lot of the changes you all have been doing. So VHFA is here for a very specific purpose. We should not, and I hope someday will not be needed in the state of Vermont, although I'll tell you that every state in the country has a housing finance agency like ours, and our goal is solely to meet where the market gaps are. So I see my friend Chris Delia here from the Vermont Bankers Association sitting to my right, and the banks, the credit unions, the mortgage companies, they are available to meet the lending needs of our state. And yet there are some ways where they have been limited in what they're able to do. And so VHFA steps in those situations. So we were created by the legislature 50 years ago. It's our birthday year. Yay, us. We were created by the legislature with the ability to sell tax exempt bonds, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. And by doing that, the governor gets to appoint a lot of our board, and the board hires me, and then I hire the 45 people I work with. Our primary focus started with offering mortgages, mostly to first-time home buyers who want to buy a home. And then 3 years later, in 1977, we expanded to lend on multifamily rental buildings. But we also, because we're a lender, we need to get paid back. It's very important to us that we understand the housing market in all across the state. So we have long had a very strong policy, data, and research arm. And so we get hired by the state to do the housing needs assessment. We have a housing data website I'll tell you about, and a lot of resources that are available I'm going to walk through. But first, I want to explain how we are able to operate for the last 50 years without ever asking you all for appropriations to run our shop. We do this because, thankfully, you all had the foresight to create us 50 years ago when these tax exempt bonds really were taking off. And what that means, we have a bond deal that we are going out to market with in the next couple of weeks. Essentially, that means we need more money to lend out right now. We're not out of money, but we're getting low. So we're about to go ask for $45 million. We're going to go to Wall Street investors, and we're going to say, will you give us $45 million for the next 30 years so that we can lend that out? And they will say yes. And they will say, we need a rate of return. You're taking $45 million, so we need some return for that. But we will accept a lower rate of return than a typical bond because it's tax exempt. and they will not have to pay taxes on the earnings of that bond. That's a pretty nice thing to have in your suite of investment options that you put into mutual funds or whatever your deal is. So we're going to get $45 million from investors. We're going to turn around and we're going to give different people, let's say a $200,000 mortgage who come to us, or the developers of affordable rental housing you were hearing VHCB talk about. We work hand in glove with VHCB, and we will often give loans to those rental developers, and we'll give them several millions of dollars all in one fell swoop, and we'll have a mortgage on that property. So for the next 30 years, we're getting mortgage payments in, whether it be from homeowners or from rental housing property owners. And in this fictitious example, they're paying us just over a 6% interest, which is below the 7% that is on the market. So they're getting a benefit of a lower rate. And we're going to turn around and promise those investors that we'd give them 5% on their return. That spread, the difference between the 6-something% we're getting in and the 5% we have to hand out, that's how we keep the lights on and operate without needing appropriations. The feds limit how much of a spread we can have. So don't worry that we're about to start charging high interest rates or whatever. Everyone's smarter than that. So that is how we are self-sustaining and how we have done the work that we've done. There are benefits to borrowing from VHFA. Home buyers are getting a lower interest rate on their mortgage. That fluctuates every day and depending on the lender and the terms. So this is very broad brush when I say that it could be a half point less. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. What they also get is down payment assistance from us. And I'm going to talk in more detail about that. But that was a program that started in this committee in 2015. And I want to talk about how that works. A couple of years ago, the legislature gave us some money so that we also, instead of just a loan to have down to help pay for down payment, that we also could give a $15,000 grant to people who are first-time homebuyers, who also are first-generation homebuyers. People know about first-gen college students, where the parents, they're the first one in their family to go to college. Think about the same thing in terms of home ownership. These would be households where we are purposefully giving this grant, where there's not a model where the parent has owned a home and theoretically have access to assets that they could pull out of their home's equity to gift to their adult child when it comes time for them to buy a home. That does not happen for all of us. Not all of us are so lucky to have that happen. But if you look at the data, and VHFA can prove this with our numbers, it does happen a lot of the time that parents will be a source of some gift when someone is buying a home. But if you're a first generation buyer, it means that your parents didn't own a home, or they lost it in foreclosure, or this is someone who is in the foster care system. Those are the three criteria of qualifying to be a first gen buyer. This program, the legislature, when they gave us the first $1 million for this, they required that we work with Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led organizations and communities and really get the word out. And the creation of this program has spurred a lot of really creative investments where we have banks and credit unions who are pairing some of the grant money we have with their own money because they're so excited about the customers we're able to reach through this program, which are by far much more over-indexed in terms of BIPOC borrowers without having a strict racial criteria in the lending, which is illegal. Also, if you're a VHFA homebuyer, you pay a lower property transfer tax, so it's just a cheaper transaction. Rental developers get similar benefits. They will pay a lower interest rate through us. If it's affordable housing that they're building and operating, it could unlock some federal tax credits there to complicated to explain in this moment, but we can offer long-term financing and generous underwriting. And sometimes we have some programs that are subsidized that I will also talk about. I use the term DPA a lot, and I mean down payment assistance. So that's what I'm talking about. And so in 2015, this committee actually the idea was brought to you all by the Lake Champlain Chamber of Commerce at the time, and supported by the Vermont State Chamber. And we talked about how people needed some DPA help. They needed help with closing costs and down payment assistance. you all allowed us to start selling state tax credits, which was a program that was created in 2000. You expanded the use of it. That program originally in 2000, that was how we would fund the creation of some rental housing development. Then we added homeownership development as an eligible use. And in 2015, you expanded that again and said VHFA should be able to sell some state tax credits. And those are 5-year tax credits. And let's just say if we can sell $250,000 of state tax credits, it means that whoever buys that, some bank is going to write off $250,000 off of the taxes they pay, their bank franchise fees on their deposits, and they will have to pay slightly less taxes because they bought this tax credit. But they're paying us for that tax credit. So they're not just getting a $250,000 benefit. They actually are paying us 90 cents on the dollar, let's say, for that benefit. And so we're getting money, and that's the money we're using to lend out to help people with their down payment. When we all created this, it was brilliant. We set it at $5,000 per household. You can see from my chart that when we designed this in 2014, the median priced home was going for under $200,000. Now statewide, it's going for over $340,000. So there's been some upward pressure that $5,000 doesn't help people the way we originally thought it would. And so the bar chart here shows you that over the years, we have changed the amount of down payment assistance, the maximum that we will let people borrow from us. It started at $5,000, and you can see from the pie chart that most of the loans we've done, 1,500 of the loans we've done, are at that $5,000 mark. That was where much of the business came from. Then in 2018, when prices were going up, we said, you know what, let's go up to $7,500. So just a little bit more money. And you can see we did 43 loans are outstanding at that amount. Then in the pandemic, a lot was happening, and we felt pressure to do more. So we said, you can either get $10,000, or if you're very low income, you can get $15,000. And in that dark black box, I'm differentiating that depending on your income during those 4 years, we would let you get either 10 or 15,000. So only very low income people got the 15,000. You can see the lighter green bars is actually how much we were giving out. Not everyone gets the maximum. Some people have some gifts, they have some other assets, they don't need as much. So we don't give out the max if they don't need it. There's underwriting that goes into this. But starting last summer, I'm going to show you the next slide, a new phenomenon's happening, and we've had to start ratcheting back this program, and we expect that we're going to further ratchet it back. And hold on one second. Oh my gosh, this is the chart I want to show you, and I'll go back. Why did we have to ratchet it back? It's because of this chart here. We can sell these tax credits every year, and we get right now just over $1 million to lend out in DPA assistance. In addition, this is a revolving loan fund. So this is set up to be a 0%. Actually, maybe I should have gone back. This is why I was smart when I set up these slides. This is what I should have been talking about. This is a loan where you don't make any payments. It's deferred. You only pay it back if you sell or refinance your house. So people have to be true first-time home buyers. We limit how much assets people can have. I don't want someone sitting on 100 grand and then I'm giving them 5 or 10 grand, not necessary. But we do want to make sure that people have some money in the bank and not have them go into owning a home and be totally house poor and not be able to cover the boiler when it breaks. This is offered through VHFA's loans. You have to get a VHFA primary mortgage, and those are offered through the state's networks of banks, credit unions, and mortgage companies. So theoretically, every lender in the state can be a VHFA participating lender, and we have a ton of them. Most of the state's lenders are. So this means that this is available across the state. And that's one way you all have used us as a quasi-governmental agency to offer something across the board, as opposed to having to set up programs with every lender, private lender in the state and deal with that. And then you've used us because it can be used with that first generation grant program I talked about, and the like. You can see here, and this is from a website. If you want to click this link, you could pull up and scroll to where your town is. You can see how many DPA loans we've done in the state, and the geographic distribution of them. And you can see we've been tracking the employers, who are of the primary borrower. And you can see I sorted it in descending order about a lot of the larger employers whose employees have benefited. And so they're having their employees rooted in the state for even longer. You can also see that our average customer with DPA versus a VHFA customer without DPA, that these are needier borrowers who need this kind of assistance. I don't have a third column for a typical buyer because I don't know private market data. So I can just tell you about our folks. I mean, all of our programs have income and purchase price limits. So this is just in this narrow sliver of the market. But you can see that the homes are appraised for less. They're buying them at cheaper prices. The mortgages are smaller. The incomes of these borrowers are lower. They have a higher loan to value. That's what LTV stands for. Their closing costs are less because they're buying cheaper homes, but they have lower credit scores. They're a bit younger. They have a larger household size. They're more likely to be BIPOC. And they all have to be first-time homebuyers in this program, but they also carry more student debt. It's just a smattering of demographics. And so, again, I feel very proud about who we're serving with this program and how beneficial it is. So back to my current day dilemma. We can sell these tax credits. We get just over $1 million, like $1.1 million a year, but we also have been, you can see starting in 2016, we launched the program in 2015. The next year, no one had refied or sold their home yet. And they didn't in 2017, but then 2018, we started having the first few people refinance their loan away from VHFA or move. And so we had an extra 34 grand that we could lend out in addition to the sale of the tax credits. And that has grown over time. And you can see our high water mark in 2021. Look at where interest rates were. That 2.9% was Freddie Mac's average interest rate in that fiscal year. So doesn't it make sense that if people had a bunch of high interest rates, they would refinance away from VHFA? Therefore, we get a lot of repayments in this program. We were doing just fine. But look at what's happened in 23 and 24. Interest rates have gone up. The repayments to this program have gone down. We are now still selling the tax credits for one more year. State fiscal year 26 will be the last year we can sell these credits. And after that, we had all decided and agreed that we would sunset the program and we'd live off this pool of revolving loan funds. I want you to know that we will be ratcheting back this program in certain ways because we will not have enough proceeds from the sale of the credits if rates stay this high and we go another couple of years without the repayments helping. So I am asking if you all would consider extending our ability to sell these tax credits for an additional 5 years. It would not impact this year's budget. It would impact those out year budgets. And by doing that, I'm hoping, again, rates may stay 6 or 7%, and that's kind of fine once we get used to it. I mentioned the velocity change before. Right now, people aren't refinancing because a lot of us have 3% mortgages, but at some point we're going to have to move. At some point we are going to pass away or something's going to happen, job change, whatever it is. And we're going to start to see that. So this is probably too complicated to explain in the first time I meet you. This is like more not doing a first date well because I give you too much. But I just want you to know that the blue, if you look at each row, that's a state fiscal year, but so are the columns. These are 5-year tax credits. So when I said we sell $250,000 and Chris's banks get to enjoy paying $250,000 less, they actually get to do that for 5 years. So when I say we get around $1 million, it's because it's 250,000 times 5, and then put that discount rate in there. You end up with just over $1 million. So we have sold, actually 2025, I should have said sold, we're no longer in process. We just finished selling the FY25 tax credits. And we do have one more year that if you do nothing, we're going to have another year next, state fiscal year 26, we'll be able to sell some more tax credits. But then the program stops. So if you were to add the ability of giving us 5 more years, the green colors, to sell the same number of tax credits, you can see what the green summary at the bottom, what the increased cost to the state of Vermont would be. And you would perpetuate the benefits that I've spent all the other slides talking about. I talked about the first gen homebuyer grant program that's different from the sale of the state tax credits. That has been for the last 3 years. You all have given us $1 million appropriation for 3 different years. I'm not used to dealing with appropriations. I gotta tell you, again, we don't go to y'all to fund ourselves. The appropriations committee is a lot to monitor and deal with. I am wondering if this program were something that the state wanted to continue to support. Could we stop asking for $1 million every year? Because I swear I spend that much in staff time trying to get the million. That's not true at all. And fold this into the sale of state tax credits. Maybe there's something about like, can we increase the state tax credits a bit and let us use $1 million for the first gen grant program and have the rest of it be a loan fund? But the benefits of the first generation homebuyer program is addressing the need of this orange and blue chart that you see on the left. This is the fact that Vermont has a horrific racial gap in homeownership. What this is telling you is that 74% of white households in Vermont own their home, and only 27% of Black or African American households own their home. That differential is worse than what it was before Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. And 4 days later, we had civil rights legislation passed that created equal opportunity and fair housing legislation. And so we have only lost ground in the disparity of homeownership rates since that time. That's not just a Vermont phenomenon, that's a national stat as well. Nationally, about 72% of the US owns their home, and about 42% of Black, nationally, 42% of Black households own their home. So our differential is far worse. We have a lower homeownership rate for Black and African Americans in the state.
To clarify, that's in all generations, or is that just among first generations?
Nope, that's all. Yep, this is for all Vermonters when they say what their race is, how many of them are owning a home. So again, we are not able to do race-based lending, and so we use that first gen as a proxy in that regard. And I already spoke to the requirements of it. You can see here that we've done over 116 grants in the last 3 years, and that the median income is lower than what you saw in those previous charts of who we're serving. And that 18% of the borrowers through this program identify as BIPOC, whereas VHFA historically, if you looked back, we were only about 3% of our borrowers were people of color prior to this program. Now that's jumped up to closer to 10%. I don't have the most recent numbers, but it's helping us meet a population that we have historically underserved. And so I appreciate this program. If you wanted to click this link, I don't have enough time to play it now. There is a link here to just a 3-minute video that where Zainab tells her story about being a new American and being at the Lund program in Chittenden County, and then working her way to getting a college degree and buying her first home, and that's her daughter there. So I've asked for 5-year extension on down payment assistance credits. I've asked for $1 million of first generation to keep that program going and some way to sustain it. But also I want to point out that as of today, a new report dropped, that's the cover of it on the right, where we worked with VITA, the Economic Development Authority, and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And our 3 agencies just launched a report on how Vermont can do more to support off-site construction and manufactured housing. We hired someone to look at the trends nationally and to look at what Vermont's history in this area is. Some of us know about the Skyline plant in Fairhaven and some the Vermont homes that have happened, as well as we're familiar with Huntington Homes or different manufactured housing providers. And we did interviews with people, surveys, and found out what's happening right now in this space. This is important if we're going to try to lower the cost of housing. And so there are some next steps that could be considered for the state about what we can do to support this industry and marketplace. I would be happy to come back and talk specifically about the findings of that. That's its own half-hour presentation, frankly, but I want to make sure you knew that report was out there. And we do have other resources available. We did come out this summer with an employer-assisted housing guide. This is trying to engage employers who are so desperate to house their workforce. And so show them the tools of how they can engage with this. It's a very long report, but there's a lot of ideas. I'd be happy to come and talk about that, or you're welcome to read that. The housing data website is a resource we offer. If you click that link, you would see profiles of the housing needs in your community and inventory of all the affordable housing. And we have some tools about how to support housing and policies locally. If your community has a housing committee or commission and they don't know what to do, that Housing Ready Toolkit will walk them through how to calculate the housing needs in your municipality. And then depending on what those priority needs are, it says the policy levers they can pull, because each of our towns is different. You know, what a community needs that has strong, robust commercial sector may look very different than a town that has a lot of rehab needs and absentee landlords, let's say. So there's different policy solutions there. And we do have a few different ways that we are increasing our assistance to small and emerging developers. We need more people to be building and developing housing, affordable, but also market rate housing. So we now have technical assistance that we are offering to developers who we've never funded before, helping give them the support they need. There's a special BIPOC developer TA program that will be launching in a few months. And this also folds in with the Department of Housing's Homes for All initiative, where they have technical assistance to people building smaller developments. I know I'm running out of time, but I want to tell you about a program the legislature supported last year with a $10 million investment. And then the state treasurer, through the 10% for Vermont program, some people call it the LIAC program, the Local Investment Advisory Council. The treasurer gave us some money. We put it with the appropriated money, and we created a rental revolving loan fund. And the demand was so high that I'm sorry, but we spent all the money in one board meeting. And so we're out of money, but what did we do when we had money? We were trying to answer the solution of employers who are so desperate to house their workforce. And this is something I think you all were talking about on Wednesday. I think Cassie was in here, and I think you're going to continue to talk about where employers need housing for their workforce. They can't attract and retain people. They are desperate. And so there's an example here at Middlebury College where they purchased some land and held it, and then a developer gave them the time to make their plans and get the permits and the funding assembled. So there's now going to be 250 homes in Middlebury that'll be a mix of off-site manufactured homeownership for sale homes, 26 of those. There's going to be some shared equity homes, which are deeply affordable. There's going to be market rate rental properties, and there's going to be some affordable rental properties. And it's going to be a whole well planned out program. We know the need for middle income households. Not only are employers telling us that they need housing for their workforce, but we know that good incomes that people are earning are still not enough. These folks are probably not going to qualify for the federal tax credits and the government subsidized programs that VHFA traditionally administers, but they still need help. They still can't make that shift into homeownership. They're renting, and they may not qualify for Section 8 or other programs, but they still need some kind of subsidy. And so we created a rental revolving loan fund with that appropriation and the treasurer's money. We said that we would give a developer only up to 35% of what they need. The rest of it, they're going to go to a bank for. This is subordinate financing. So we designed this program after talking with banks and asking them, where's the needs? Where can we fill that market gap? Let's go back to why VHFA is here. It's just to be able to fill in the market gap. These are subordinate loans that start as construction loans and they move to be permanent loans so we can do a term of 3 years if it's just the construction piece, up to 30 years, that permanent mortgage. We can do interest only, but essentially what this is a subsidized interest rate. We're offering very low rate loans to these properties. The affordability restrictions are set above where the traditional government programs are eligible, meaning our traditional affordable housing definition means you have to earn less than 60% of the median income. And this starts at 65% of median and goes up to 150% of median. So we're trying to hit that middle income market that doesn't have other assistance available to it. Think about it as we talk about benefit cliffs. This is an underserved part of the market. When you're giving someone a subsidized interest rate, that has real benefit. And it's meaning that housing is being developed that wouldn't otherwise. A subsidized interest rate also isn't just free money, especially if the loan is only 35% of what you need. So we can't ask for perpetual affordability with this. We can't ask to achieve a gazillion public policy goals if we're only going to give people a small loan at a cheaper rate than they could otherwise get. But what we can do is we can ask for this to be, some of these units to be affordable. And it would have to be affordable for at least 7 years or the term of the loan. You get a 30-year loan from us, you got to be affordable for actually 33 years, because whenever you pay back that loan to us, we need another 3 years of affordability because we don't want any of these renters to be surprised. But we're capping the increase in rents every year that you get the financial benefit of the subsidized loan. So if you have a 30-year loan with us, you're going to have affordable housing for 33 years. You pay that back after 10 years because the market allows you to, and that's the right decision to keep your rents lower. You can get a better deal. That's fine. You still have to keep it affordable for 3 more years. But then that affordability goes away. And what we're left with is the benefit of the 10 years that it was affordable plus 13 years it was affordable. And we have housing, which that has an economic benefit, full stop. And that loan they had gets repaid to us, and we're going to turn around and do it again. So the money's never lost. No developer, which I hate how developers are spoken of now as if it's a bad profession, but no one's getting rich off this. They just are able to use this to lower the cost. You can see here in these circles that we prioritized rural and underserved communities and those who can provide deeper affordability. We worked a lot to make sure that this money went to those new and emerging developers, and we gave them technical assistance to help them. But also, the best part of this program, when we talk about how to engage employers, what we required was if the developer was going to apply for this program, they had to have talked with at least 2, but hopefully more than that, employers locally. And they had to do surveys. We told them what the surveys had to look like. They had to survey their workforce, find out what kind of incomes are these people earning, what are their housing needs? Are they where they want to be or not? Because it's like, oh yeah, no, Maura's living in this town. That's fine. Well, no, you actually talk to Maura. No, Maura's daycare is closer to work. Maura's healthcare, Maura's boyfriend, Maura's whatever it is there. She actually wants to live next door to the plant, but she can't. That's information to know, because if a developer then wants to build next to the plant, that's a win-win. So there has to be engagement with the employer. Additionally, if the employer or that municipality housing the employer chips in 5% of the cost of building the housing, then we're going to drop that interest rate and we're going to give them even better terms. That subsidy gets even richer. That's how we're luring in. I shouldn't say luring. That sounds so Machiavellian. We're enticing more money. We're leveraging. That's the term. Leveraging more money.
Luring,
So
stalking.
you can see exactly. I'm a stalker. I'm a lurer. So we got 10 million in appropriations, but in the projects we funded, 21 million of employer and municipal money went into this. So it's working. We're able to fund about 300 apartments, about 260 of them are affordable because we don't require everything to be affordable. It can just be a portion of a building. You can see the income levels of people served. I wrote that out. And most of you don't talk in terms of percent AMI, area median income. I do, but if you don't speak my language, you can see what the incomes and rents are there. I noticed last night that someone on my team put St. Albans in Grand Isle County. I apologize for that. But you can see the distribution. You know, we were able to only fund this many projects with the $10 million. Gee, if there was any way we could get more money for this program, not only would there be tremendous demand, but also this kind of community-based housing is where we can engage employers to support them in supporting housing. I know there are a lot of debates right now that employers need housing so much for their workers, and we're looking at models where the employer becomes the landlord and the property owner. And I get it, because if I were underwater and I'm looking for something to grab, I don't know that I would think slowly enough to realize, wait, that's another drowning person's arm I'm grabbing versus that's a buoy, you know? And right now I want to make sure that we remain clear-eyed that we should be grabbing the buoy. And what we should be doing is supporting community-based housing, because it's already hard enough when we lose our jobs that we lose our healthcare. It will become more complicated in this housing market to also lose our housing if we lose our jobs, which could mean our kids' school districts, which could mean access to our local healthcare options and the rest. And so if there's a way that we can, not going to say lure, we can entice employers to invest in community-based housing like Middlebury did. Perfect example. Middlebury knows that college, whether it be their professors or their students or their line staff, they are 30% of that community. They did not need to require that they have access to those 250 homes, because they know that 30% of those homes are going to go to people affiliated from Middlebury College. And therefore, those staff and connected folks have some choice in the matter. And so if we're going to have any kind of state support, it should be community-based housing. But we do want to find ways to engage employers so that we are not leaving money on the table. Because I do think there are a lot of employers who are willing to do something, but they can't do everything. They don't have $20 million. They're not Middlebury College. They're not able to buy land and sit on it for 3 years. But they may have something that they can chip in. And I think that a program like we've designed does that. This actually shifts over, I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time. I'm sorry. We did have another program, which was a middle income homeownership development program. I don't want you to think it's just about rental housing. We had $24 million in appropriations to address, again, a program where we would give just 35% of what a developer needed to build a for sale home. They built homes that were on average about 1,300 square feet, very modest starter homes. We would cover the difference between what it cost that builder to build the home and then what it was going to appraise for. That's the value gap. You can't get a loan on that. It's made up. There's no, if it doesn't appraise, it's not real. I know it cost me $500,000 to build this home, but it's only going to appraise for 400. We would come in and pay that $100,000 difference. If they still hadn't spent all their money and they hadn't gotten to that 35% of the development cost, they could not sell that home for 400 grand. They could buy down the affordability even farther, maybe offer that to a buyer for $300,000 or $350,000. That's what this program paid for. That affordability gap that was deeply subsidized, that stays with the home. So the next buyer also would get the benefit of that, let's say $100,000 off the price of the home. You can see that there are about 20 communities we were able to fund with this across the state. And there's lots of examples. We funded 125 homes. That's serving, I try to figure out how many people is that. Well, I'm looking at bedrooms. I don't know. Some people share bedrooms. So it's, probably 400 some odd Vermonters living in these homes. We gave them an average of 130 grand to build it. And the purchase price was very low compared to what's on the market otherwise. And we were required that a third of the homes go to the shared equity model, which is a nonprofit driven model that needs its own testimony. But we did more than half of the homes ended up with shared equity. And you can see some of the pictures of some of the people in the homes served there. This just speaks more to the incomes of people who were served. And lastly, just to tell you what I already told you, I'd love to extend the state housing tax credit for 5 more years. I'd love I didn't talk about that second bullet and probably need to come back and do it. I'd love to continue the first gen grant program. And we have a lot of other initiatives that I'll be talking about in the housing committees. I just want to say that second bullet. What that's saying is that rental revolving loan fund that I love, the $10 million I talk so much about, we check that every time someone moves in, someone is income eligible. And then we require that the manager of that property only raise the rent a max of 3%. It says 3% in statute. We want to make sure that they don't jack up the rents after they get the loan from us. But between property tax bills and insurance costs, it is not responsible for us to cap these properties at 3%. I'm not saying it's going to be 10%. I'm just saying to have put 3% in statute was a shortcoming on our part. We should have realized that's our goal, but I can't commit to that because I don't know what the future holds. We're looking through the Budget Adjustment Act, but would love to put it in as many bills as possible because I never know where it's going to move. But we'd like to change it to say that 3% is our target, but that the property owners have to come to VHFA and bring their budgets and justify something if it's above that. We regulate 9,500 units in the traditional government sense, so we're used to doing this. But if you give us the ability to govern this on behalf of the builders, I believe that we can do a good job and keep these properties up in their maintenance, because otherwise we're going to have a government subsidized program that could fall into disrepair, and then those investments that we made are at risk long term. I didn't leave you any time for questions. There is a hallway and I'm here all the time.
Certainly have you back in again. Thank you very much. On the manufacturing house side, there's a stigma that comes along with manufactured housing. And I know that those homes are much better built now than they used to be. And I don't know how we get around that stigma.
There's that, and there's also that manufactured housing just means off-site construction, panelized, and modular building doesn't always come with that same stigma either. But there have been things that the state has done to support lending in the sense on manufactured homes. So yeah, I believe in many ways state's doing a lot to support manufactured homes. It's 8% of our housing stock are traditional, what we'd call mobile homes.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
I mean, working in real estate, it's a real issue. If you've got a double wide, you lose about 80% of your lenders.
Yeah.
Are they still depreciating instead of appreciating?
The zero energy modulars are doing far better. It depends on the age of the home largely. I don't know if you have an opinion. In single and double wides.
Demand is really kind of canceling that. I mean, I'm seeing mobile homes and parks selling for over $100,000, and that's in our neck of the woods. So I can't say that's for some of the smaller towns, but yeah, in Milton, one of my partners put up a mobile home in a park for like $140,000. And we're not talking about like a 2020. I mean, this was late 90s, early 2000s. So if there is that going on, I think right now, because of the appreciation in the market, it's canceling that.
And can I just make a point that also the manufactured home doesn't necessarily mean that it's a home on a chassis. You can build offsite and put it onto the foundation to pad, so you don't have to deal with that HUD issue.
In fact, if you're gonna get financing, it has to be off the chassis and yeah.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, some of these houses, there's one that I had in St. Albans that was one of the old Sears bought homes. As long as it's deeded, you're okay. What it comes down to is how it's written in the town docs. If it's typically with a double wide, it's considered a piece of property on the land. Whereas, if you build a manufactured home or take the center chassis out like you're talking about, now it becomes an improvement on the land. A lot of it is just mental gymnastics and maybe something, banking can work with on that.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and certainly we'll have more discussion.
Good work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all in person and not just stalking.
Okay, committee, lunchtime back here at 1. up with the chamber, Vaughn Chamber, and Lake Champlain Chamber. We're out of here hopefully by